Good afternoon. My name is Sandra Baer. I'm the CEO of Personal Cities based in Washington, D.C. I'm coming to you today from Vicenza, Italy, where I'm living and working for a month, just enjoying travel again in our new and recovered world to some extent. It is my pleasure to be on a panel with three experts, and we will be talking about reimagined workplaces. I think it's one of the hottest topics, not only for cities, which is my interest, but for communities in general, and for every individual on the planet who's thinking of finding a new work life vis-a-vis the pandemic. Either we're emerging from it, or we're still in it, or we're looking for the next pandemic. We still are concerned about how we will recover and thrive in a new work environment. My company is, as I said, Personal Cities, and we're really focused on sort of city innovations and collaborations. We work to help cities accelerate their investments in policies and programs, especially around community identity and city branding. We're really focused on helping cities create new collaborations and coalitions, especially as the small businesses in cities figure out ways to recover and succeed going forward. I'd like to introduce the three panelists, and I'll have them give a bit more introduction of themselves in a minute. Greg Staw is the CEO, or the co-founder, I guess, of On Song. It is a workplace a choir organization that does singing workshops, well-being, mindfulness, unity at work. All of these things are a part of what On Song is about. And I want Greg to talk much more in detail about his company, which in my mind, you know, we need your business all over the world, Greg. So we'll look forward to hearing from you about that. Sari Vanska is the CEO and the founder of Mutos in the UK. She's based in Bristol, and her company is also very human-centric and based on well-being and happier employees, happier customers, you know, just a better work-life environment, retaining employees, making sure that you have the ones that are there are satisfied, the customers that are there are satisfied. So I want to hear much more about your work as well, Sari. And finally, Julie Kent. Julie Kent is in transition, I guess, having had many important jobs and still now moving forward into something new, I'm sure. She was, I guess, the vice chair of Pied Piper Appeal, the chair of Cheltenham Open Door. She was a junior warden at the Honorable County of Gloucestershire, and I think is based in Gloucestershire. So it is my pleasure to have these three really interesting and knowledgeable people about what's going on in the world of work. So what I'd like to do is start with some questions and have each of our panelists introduce themselves in more detail and answer this first question, which I framed sort of to get us all thinking about the business community. What are the top three questions that businesses need to consider as the economy opens up, as we are changing work life, as we are changing the way in which we engage with business, engage with retail and hotels and travel, and you know, we have a different kind of life going forward. So what are the top three considerations that businesses, large or small, should consider? And Greg, can we start with you for that answer?
Absolutely. Hi, Sandra. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I've been running On Song for the past 5 or so years. I actually come from a bit of a mixed background in arts and science and digital technology. And I was running a couple of community choirs in London in around 2014-15, and had also previously been singing in them and seen the sort of colossal impact that they sort of had on people's positive impact they had on people's well-being in terms of community, as well as the actual act of singing and kind of all the benefits that brings. So decided to take that into businesses. And first it was just kind of running these sort of singing sessions, maybe at conferences and events, as well as regular workplace choirs. And then that sort of expanded out more generally into what we call sort of cultural well-being interventions. And the thing that generally defines a cultural wellbeing intervention for us is kind of thinking about it being part for a group or for a whole organization, and also being more of a sort of preventative intervention, as we call it, rather than sort of thinking about, you know, necessarily thinking that here's a problem that we need to react to. We're saying we're building community and that kind of thing, which ends up having a preventative effect, reducing the chances of more stress and other things like that developing. Yeah, so top 3 questions, you know, thinking about my experience certainly is, and this sort of very unusual, you know, 18 months that we've just had, you know, thinking about how do companies effectively use technology. And I suppose, I mean, effectively, not just in terms of, you know, optimizing it economically, but how do they use it in such a way that what has been lost in the sense of that interpersonal connection is not just kind of like, it's not just a proxy for that. We just think, oh yeah, you know, yeah. Anyway, so using technology effectively. And then I suppose the sort of sub questions of that is, how do people stay supported and connected in this environment? So, you know, completely digitally, or indeed in a kind of hybrid situations where you can have some people at work some of the time. And then, you know, how do businesses sort of maximize this opportunity that, you know, there aren't many scenarios we can imagine where you would have, you know, in many ways a blank slate. We're coming back to a completely, you know, unknown way of working, you know, that we haven't, it's unprecedented. And so, you know, how can companies say, not to sort of desperately try to get back to some kind of familiar place, but how do they take that opportunity to reimagine, reinvent, while keeping, you know, people at the heart of that, and you know, and recognizing that it's not a sort of let's get it right now and then we're done. It's an ongoing process. So those are the sort of the key things for me.
Yeah, I want to go back to your technology idea. Can you give an example of, you know, what is the, besides Zoom, what is the technology that you think people should be sort of leveraging now in our new changed environment?
Well, so, I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, Zoom, but, you know, there's ways that that companies will, so, you know, keep people connected to each other. So for example, that might be, how do they hear about things that are going on? So obviously, it's, you know, it's not just email, you know, is it of having, you know, your intranet on an app and everyone's kind of, you know, you don't want to have 15 notifications popping up every time something like that happens.
Right.
You know, how can you develop a sort of a culture of communication where people feel supported and included, but not bombarded? So, you know, and these are inevitably at the moment technological sort of ideas, or, you know.
Yeah. Well, I like that phrase, supported and included, but not bombarded. That's great.
I mean, it's a tricky balance.
It's a tricky balance, yeah. Sorry, tell us your response to that question, and tell us more about Mutus.
Hi, thank you, Sandra. And nice to see all the other panelists. It's brilliant to be here. As you can see, my name is not quite local when the local is England. So I'm originally from Finland. Name is Finnish, but I've lived in Switzerland for a while, and I've lived in the UK now for great many years. I thought I'm going to take a slightly different approach. I'm not going to talk about my company. I talk about how I ended up here where I am right now. And then I'm sure that through the conversation, people can hear what my passion is, what I do. And my work experience has mainly been in tech companies. And I basically worked for Hewlett-Packard for 19 years altogether in Finland, Switzerland, and in the UK. And I think I'm very lucky, if you call that, or blessed, however you phrase it, to have started my career in a company such as Hewlett-Packard, it used to be, everything has changed now, but especially in the 90s, it used to be a truly human-centric company. And the HP way was a truly human-centric company culture. So I experienced how it is to work in a company where humans are humans, so to speak, and where things work, and when you are generally happy, you have a good employee experience, you have a good work experience. And then through my other work experiences that followed, when I have been working on a variety of companies on a project type of work, I have seen the different environments. I have experienced different company cultures, which are not, there is no human actually mentioned in the company culture at all. They are totally different. So that's the background I have. And then through some personal challenges just over a decade ago, I was introduced to this concept of looking at human beings and our well-being and performance and our whole existence through a totally different lenses, this kind of holistic, integrated lenses, through a concept that all human beings come into this world with a set of human needs. We all are born with them. They are basically our survival needs. They are in physical and in psychological forms. And when we get all our human needs met in balance, we are well. We cannot be stressed, we cannot be anxious, we cannot be depressed, because that's against the law of nature. So that was the basis that I was introduced to, and I ended up being severely depressed after a severe burnout. And when I was introduced to this concept, I understood why I was suffering. I understood why I ended up feeling or becoming depressed, and I understood that how can I find my way out, and not only how I can overcome that, but how can I leave that state of being behind me altogether? And it has worked for me ever since. And that's the basis of my life. That's the basis of my business as well. So I am absolutely passionate to open people's eyes and say that let's understand how we humans function. Let's understand what brings the unwellness and what brings the wellness. And that's what I'm bringing to the companies, is that I give this, it's like psychoeducation, very common sense training, open people's eyes and say that let's look at these things differently. And we go to the workplace and we say that make sure that your people feel safe, they have some sort of control, they feel respected, they are part of a well-functioning team, they have all the tools they need to do their work, they have a sense of achievement which is acknowledged and appreciated, and they have a meaning and purpose in their job and the way how they contribute to the company. And we look at those basic human needs and we start changing the companies in such a way that the environment and the company culture starts actually properly supporting those human beings. And when that happens, people performance goes up, productivity goes up, retention goes up, because people like working there and they don't want to leave anymore, and sickness kind of goes down because people are better. So that was kind of a holistic way of describing. And for me, because people are my business and I'm looking at everything through the human lenses, I think one of the absolute essentials that the companies need to start thinking about is that, okay, how does the future look to us? Are we going to stay at home? Are we going to go into the office? Are we going to do hybrid? And it's not the leaders who need to make those decisions. It actually needs to be the employees who are being heard, that what fits, what is suitable for you. We are all different. So we need to take basically individual kind of desires into account to make sure that everybody works in such a way that they can be doing their best. So I think that's the main thing.
So sorry, I think Julie has the same ideas about really listening to employees, but how does that really, rather than just saying those words, give me an example perhaps of, what does that mean? I mean, if a company says, well, you can do whatever you want, you can work from home, you can come into the office, we're going to have a special safe place for you to work. I mean, then it's just sort of everybody does their own thing. What do you think? No, how does that work in reality?
It needs to be coordinated. I mean, I was, again, lucky that I have worked for companies where I have been in global programs where every single human being works from home, because we are all over the world. And that happened, 10 years ago already.
Sure.
And of course, it needs coordination. I mean, we need to have the technology up to speed so that people have access to all the tools from home. There needs to be a coordination, of course, that, who is going to be where and when. And of course, when it comes to, we are going to talk about the different nature of office in the future. But of course, there needs to be scheduling and a coordination, who is going to be in the office and when, so that we can, optimally use the office and we don't run out of hot desks or stuff. So again, it needs to be kind of the design, I believe, needs to happen from the individuals up. But of course, there needs to be the coordination and a kind of roles and rules to some extent, that how are we going to all work done.
We're still going to need rules to follow, right?
Oh, we do. I like rules.
Well, thank you. Sorry. Julie, please tell us more about what you're up to. And the answer again to that question was, what are the 3 top considerations business should deal with as we emerge from the pandemic? Julie?
Hi, it's lovely to be here, and I actually hosted this. It's nice to be actually on the panel this time. I've actually come from an education background, and just last summer retired after living in a school, an independent school in Cheltenham for 30 years. And I was a boarding house mistress, so I lived with 60 teenage girls for 20 years, 24 hours a day. And I finished my last term of 30 years with an empty boarding house, because some of them were military families, so some of them were all over the world. And so they all had to get out and get back before the borders were closed. And I did my last term with no girls in the house at all. But I feel that education is really, we've talked about all the health workers and everyone in the NHS and whatever, but those in education have had a really tough time. Teachers especially, they had to suddenly plan to teach online all across the world in different time scales. At one point in January, they were told they were coming back to school, and then the night before, our Prime Minister decided no, they weren't coming back. They'd set all the schools up to test the kids twice a week. And I do think that we need to think about these young people, especially the pupils who were 17, 18, those that didn't do their A-levels last year, didn't go to the universities of their choices. Some of them did go to their universities and actually dropped out. There's quite a big dropout list, because once they got there, many go for the university experience. And of course, they weren't getting that experience. And I think it's really going to make the educationalists look at the way that we teach, not only in schools, but also in universities, which will then feed to the businesses, because I think more young people have actually thought, well, actually, I won't go to university. So what is available to me? I've got 3 top A-levels or whatever it is across the world. I want to do a degree. I want to do accountancy. And actually, luckily in this country, you can do accountancy now in a practice instead of going to university. Law companies are just beginning to. I know Bristol is our closest, where you can go and try and do a law degree as part of a legal company. But I think it is going to be looked at. I think education in the future is going to be different. And, should we set up, I'm going to go back to the question, Stormy, of yesterday, should we set up central schools that can teach all over the world? You don't have to be in the classroom anymore. And I think it's quite exciting for education to think like that. And I think it will feed through to the businesses and give businesses opportunity to train 18-year-olds exactly how they want them to be. They don't have to come at 21 after a degree and they're already been messing about, or they might have studied business, but actually it's out of date by the time they get to the company. So companies have quite an opportunity to train these young people that are, their brains want all that information and they're ready to go. So I feel really strongly that, education needs to look at itself and make the most of this time, where it's almost where we're swiping it clean, aren't we? And saying, right, let's change it and let's do something exciting. So that's something that I feel quite strongly about, that, education hasn't been talked about enough, I don't think, and should be. Well,
I want to delve into that a little deeper, because I too am a big fan of education in new ways. And I remember when people said, we can't have a town council meeting online. How could we possibly do that? And then COVID forced us to do it in one sense. But I think the issue that I see, not only for students and young adults, but also in the business world, can businesses make this online training, this education, this better communication, can they make it more compelling? Can they make it exciting? I've watched kids sit in front of, a teacher, and they're bored to death. And same is true in some of these business courses that I've observed. So what's the opportunity to really shake that up and say, let's do this differently?
I think that it needs to be more interactive, doesn't it, really? And now you can have a poll, you can be teaching and they can download something so they can answer a question on a phone and you'll see how many people said A, how many people said B. I think the more interactive, the better, so that they can't just pretend to be there and actually go shopping down the road and then come back to tune out when it finishes. You have got to interact with the lessons. And I think as time goes on, I think teachers in the past year and a half have just been managing to get through the curriculum because they haven't even known at the end of the year whether they'll be examined or not. And so I think if it was a clean slate where this is the way we're going to teach now and it will just be assessments or whatever, they have a chance to be a bit more creative, I think, in the classroom, which would be exciting.
Sorry, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, again, going back to, let's understand these differences that we all have, because all the training, we all understand the world differently. We learn differently. Some people learn, they get information through reading. Some people have difficulties with that. Some people like listening. Some people like watching. Some people like the theory. Some people like the practical side. So then again, we have so many not challenges. We have so many opportunities, but we really need to start understanding again that, it's not one size doesn't fit all, even when it comes to learning. Yeah. And we need to open those different kind of avenues. But of course, the fact is that our human brain is programmed to connect with other human brains in a 3D world. I always say that, our brain didn't evolve in 2D world where we are all just flat and we are on the screen. So the brain gets a bit kind of confused. So we do need this. We need to find ways of being with human beings, because that again is what brings the well-being to the brain and to us. Right. But again, we either live in the problem and we are stuck in the problem, or we start living in the solution and we start finding those solutions. That's what I always say. So the opportunities are quite immense, even in that side.
Well, I think they are immense, but we need to sort of maybe hone in on some of the things that we can recommend to people. Greg, I wanted to follow up with you because when Sari was talking about different learning styles, I actually have a son who is a musician in Los Angeles, California, and he was an auditory learner. And so, he had trouble learning on the visual side, as a lot of kids do. And I was thinking that in your work, Greg, you've really honed in on maybe some new solutions for people to engage not only with their peers in the workplace, but also, across the globe, across a company, up and down and hierarchy. How do you see that maybe getting out there more?
So in terms of having the kind of breadth of those styles, I mean, something like music obviously represents such a clear opportunity to approach something which might be as simple as learning a song, approach that from a number of different styles. I mean, I think and part of the key thing for in my experience is recognizing that you can do all of this kind of thinking about amazing sort of ways of bringing that learning to people. But what Julie was just saying, in fact, when you said thinking about university students going to university, not having the university experience and therefore dropping out, and thinking about how sort of nuanced and complicated and wide-ranging that experience is, and how many factors are involved in it, and then obviously people coming along and doing some kind of extremely poor digital imitation of that, and obviously not finding that, and the idea that culturally that we would be able to recreate something like that online in the first go is sort of ridiculous. And so just thinking about what you were saying, so the idea that we could come to an organization that has all of its own sort of needs and quirks and ways of working, and that we could say like, okay, well, the way that we're going to approach this is we just send you an audio file. It's on this link, listen to it, and then we'll come to the thing and then we'll sing it and then you're done. Right. I mean, you can have approaches that make sense, but you just have to do it. And it's just a lot of, trial and error. And also importantly, engaging with those people, just asking people all the time and not just once, and just saying, okay, so how is this working? How does this style, you know, fit? We can do things based on our experience. And, you know, there's people who learn, as you say, with music better by ear, or people who like sheet music, or people who they go away and do it and then they come back and they're like, okay, I've got it. I can't do it in the moment, but, you know, and, you know, yeah. So, but just thinking about how much that applies to any of these, this crazy sort of transition or sort of, you know,
yeah,
trying to do, you just have to try something, get feedback, effectively look at that feedback, analyze it, think about it, recreate, you know, and then just keep those dialogues going. So
yeah,
in terms of different styles, yes, there are lots of different things that work, and for us musically, we've kind of, you know, but even for us, like we have, you know, many facilitators who work best in different conditions, so it's a question of thinking about that as well, and thinking about the style that someone might have and how that might fit with a certain company style. So it's about finding out from them how they work, you know, and yeah, so just sort of, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I guess I plead ignorance here that I'm not aware of a lot of companies like yours, Greg, that actually, you know, explore these other options, other styles of working and creating community. But I want to shift a little bit to sort of a serious question, which I think is really out there, about the fears that employees have. You know, I haven't been at work in 18 months, or I really don't know about going back into the workplace. I don't know if I'll feel safe, or, you know, if I don't go back to the workplace, am I in jeopardy of, you know, not having face time with my boss or with other employees? I mean, what are the fears? Julie, maybe you can take a crack at this. The fears that people had, what are the ideas that you have about how we could, you know, give people confidence that, you know, this is going to be new and different and not necessarily better, but it's going to be different. And here's how we're going to, you know, treat you as an employee in this new world. What do you think, Julie?
I think it is going to be very difficult. And I think it's really important that employers ask and listen to employees. And again, is this an opportunity to change completely how we work? You know, a lot of parents of young children have actually spent a lot of time with their young children, which they wouldn't have before. You know, they would have been in school and they would have been in nursery, and they haven't been able to go. And so a lot of people have been trying to juggle looking after their young children and working from home. And, you know, is this an opportunity where you say to your employer, can I not work between 10 and 3 or whatever, and can I work at night? Can I do those hours at night when my children are in bed? And, you know, for a lot of people, they've actually enjoyed having more time with their children, but they love their jobs and they still want to do them.
Right.
And actually, there were a lot of employers at the beginning who were very skeptical about trusting their staff to work properly at home. I think trust was a really big thing in the beginning. And I certainly was on a lot of networking groups where the bigger bosses were worried about whether their teams would still generate enough productivity or whatever. And actually, before a year was out, they were really impressed how their teams had behaved and how much productivity there was. So I hope that has given employers the chance to rethink it, and maybe people need to be eased in gently. So whether employers say, okay, you can for 4 days a week, but I want 1 day a week that you come in. And actually, once the employees go in for 1 day, they might then actually say, well, I could do 2 or 3. They might get a balance and get their confidence back, because you know, it's confidence, isn't it? And self-esteem and all those things, that to go from nothing to full on again, I think is going to be very difficult and not very good for anyone's mental health, really. I think you've got to be eased in gently. And I just hope that employers will listen to the employees more. And surely that's going to be a win-win all round, really.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I guess there are certain maybe new kinds of communication we should employ as employers or managers in a company that, you know, maybe we were used to having just in-person conversations, and now you've got to put maybe much more in writing, and you've got to reinforce it more than one time, as you say. I mean, I think there's maybe a set of guidelines about better communication. If some people are working remotely, if some people are in the office, if they switch around, I mean, it sounds pretty confusing to me, but I'm not one of those coordinating kind of people. Sorry, what's your sense of the, I like what Julie said about trust. I've done a lot of work on that topic as well. What's your sense about building trust and sort of creating this self-esteem with employees so that they're not fearful or as fearful about these big changes?
Well, it's all about, I mean, something what I did in my past is business change management. How do you manage the people side of change? And it all comes down to, it's the plan what you are aiming for, plan how you are aiming to get where you are aiming for. You need to plan the communication. The best practice is that, you know, these kind of higher level decisions, the kind of the business directions, they need to come from the leadership. The people managers are the one who communicate the practical, the real life stuff to their employees, things that really matter to employees and things that impact the employees. So even the communication, you know, you need to get the communication structure right, even when it comes to introducing that, okay, we need to start planning how are we going to do things in the future. And you know, when it comes to human beings, our three most primitive needs are need to feel safe, need to feel we have control over the things that are happening to us or around us, and we need to feel that we are respected. So if you mess up your change program, if you have a change program, but you're basically journey towards this future situation, if you mess it up in such way that people are not being heard, people are not being given the control over what they need or what they want, they of course feel totally disrespected and they feel really unsafe about the future. And when you meddle with those three basic instincts in human beings, our brain has an immediate reaction to that. We feel it strongly, we feel it immediately. When we feel it, you know, the brain changes the way how it works and we lose access to our human intelligence, productivity, common sense, anything. So you have a mess in your hand. You said to be controversial, so I'm quite controversial with my sayings sometimes. I try to bring this common sense into the picture. But you know, it's all about these needs that people need to get met, and then they are well and they can understand what's happening. But you know, the trust needs to be earned. If somebody treats me respectfully, is reliable, takes into account what I feel and my desires, listens to me, and then does what they say they were going to do, trust is being built. And I think in a workplace, especially this huge transition potentially which we have, we do need to have procedures. We do need to have guidelines. We need to have something, the framework, how we need to all play along. And it needs to be very well communicated, in my view. And we really need to, again, it all comes down to, you know, understanding human beings, because when it comes to what sort of fears can one experience? If I was asked to go back to the office now, I was given no options, just to say that, Sarin, you need to start working from the office. My personal fears would be, oh my God, is it going to be safe? Is the environment going to be COVID safe? Is it going to be hygiene? Is there fresh air? Are my colleagues going to comply? Are they actually going to bring something into that whole concept would be totally overwhelming to me. And then of course comes the fear of, now I have my childcare sorted out, I can look after my parents, I have time on my own, suddenly I need to start commuting 3 hours a day. Oh my God, I can't cope with all that. It's, you know, that sort of fear which comes to the picture. And of course, if you don't have those guidelines and that visibility and that kind of, you know, surveying how the employees really need these things to happen for them. Another type of safety is, what about if I have to say that I can't go back to the office? Are they going to sack me? What's going to happen to me? Right. Am I going to be treated differently? Am I going to be left out from the community that happens in the office? There are these huge things, you know, which kind of impact people and start taking people's headspace. And that's why it is absolutely essential that companies have these basic understandings of the human beings, how these things, how differently people take these situations, and that they are helped through external or internal bodies to actually manage that change. in the best possible way. Because I think when that's done, then again, we are minimizing all that interruption to people's well-being and productivity, because they don't need to, that stuff is not taking headspace.
Yeah, well, I think you've just, I was taking notes. I think you've just put together a list of things we should be definitely, as employers, as, executives in a company or any kind of business, should be thinking about. If you're going back to work, is it safe? How are your childcare arrangements going to change? If you're taking care of elderly parents, how does that, what's the impact on that from what you were doing during COVID, and all of those fears about, will I be sacked, or will I not have the advantages if I choose not to work in an office? I mean, people are nervous about that.
Yeah, and the fact is in today's world that if I'm not pleased with you as an employer, I go elsewhere. And that's the thing. It's a direct impact to the retention, both the talent attraction and retention. If you don't do it well.
Yeah. That's right, Greg. Please add on.
Just to chip in on that. I mean, it's just the analogy of doing what we've been doing and doing singing in workplaces, and the situation we're in. Obviously, it's a sort of massively more complicated version now, but we have the same thing where sometimes it's voluntary, so people just sign up if they want to, and sometimes it's sort of sprung on people at an event, say, and they don't know what's going to happen, and the way that they react is just completely a result of the communication that they've received around it. So if they know that they're not going to be called on to sort of perform in front of anyone, if they know that it's going to be a safe learning environment, if they know it just completely changes their experience. And indeed, if it's something that's recurring and they come back the next week, they've seen what's happened, they feel much more secure, and then as time goes on, more people come along, they tell people it's actually it's not scary, we're listened to. And then if they say, whether it's a sort of musical request or a sort of the way that the sessions work, or whether they can move something, if they feel heard as well, then all of those things, again, this is just a microcosm of what Sari was just saying. It's just that. But and now that with thousands more variables and individual needs and complexities, so it's just
well, does your company, for example, when you when a company or a community hires you to do this, do you have in writing a set of guidelines that say this is how you should communicate to people to make them feel comfortable and not fearful? I mean, do you already have that in place?
Yeah, absolutely, we do. Certainly for both for the facilitators who will then be running the sessions, and indeed for our communication with the companies. And it's just a lot of asking, listening.
Right. We don't do enough of that listening, do we?
We don't. Yeah, and obviously there's so many parallels with music about listening is sort of 2/3 of it. That kind of thing. I mean, just
right. I agree 100%. I wanted to shift to a different gear as well, because I think all of you have said, we have to listen to the employees, the individuals that are, in a very different world, a very different future probably. And I think Julie and I had a little conversation about this via text, emails. Let's say that I have a company, a 50-person company, and I'm saying I will encourage every employee to work in the office 3 days a week. And that's, just it's my company. I can make that decision. And then, I would have communication from the employees. Well, that's a crazy idea, or, I can't do that, or I want to work 5 days a week, or, there's going to be a lot of, I think, give and take and balance. And then, of course, if you look at the broader community, some of what you were talking about, Greg, I mean, what is the impact if every company on High Street has people working just 3 days a week? What is the impact on retail, on restaurants, on hotels, on travel, on the whole universe in which we live? It's not just a singular decision to say I want you to work 3 days a week in the office. So. And I think, all of us that are in this sort of well-being, wellness kind of world, it's not just the individual employees we need to listen to. We need to think bigger, in my opinion, because we need to, there's so many residual effects around that. What's your take on all of that? Julie, you want to kick that off?
Yeah, I mean, it was really noticeable because I sit on the three boards of three different charities in this area, and we actually attempted to set up a pop-up shop in the centre of Cheltenham in the middle of the pandemic, really because we were offered some really cheap office space and we had an excess of clothes, and obviously the shop hadn't been open, so we thought, oh well, we'll set up a pop-up. I think it was one of the first chance that we opened up and shops opened up. It was certainly in the summer, and it was very noticeable that people were not coming to the town centre. And Cheltenham actually has got lots of big office space, and because people were still working at home, as you say, the cafes and the restaurants and everything were struggling. So unless the cafes and restaurants also become sort of workspaces where people can spread out more, because obviously the tower blocks in our areas, you are all shoved in, and you are on great big long tables and 10 people in a row or whatever. Whereas if all those restaurants and some pubs actually did do it, they offered free coffee all day or something if you worked in their pub, and it was one person on each table in very rural countryside places, because otherwise they were getting no trade at all. Right. And so they did open up with brilliant Wi-Fi. And actually some of the people were very glad to get out of their houses. Sure. So it was the safety aspect. They didn't want to be in an office where they felt closed in and too many people, but they were happy to go into a pub that had all these nooks and crannies and work all day at a table where they weren't close to anyone else, really. Yeah. So again, it's a case of thinking around it. Cheltenham, for example, the road we did the pop-up had 6 cafes on it. And if each of those, changed the orientation of the tables and everything else, they could get quite a few people working there in a nice environment. People are still in the town. They still might go out to Starbucks or whatever. I just think it needs rethinking, because it is good for us to get out. It isn't really good, right. Even though people are anxious and want to stay at home, it's not really good for them to be at home the whole time, is it? They need to be out. And like you say, sorry, interacting with other people, because that is what we really crave. So right. I just think it needs to be rethought out to get people back into
and I think it takes some creativity and some letting go. This is the way we've always done it. Well, can we let go of that? Can we empower not only the employees to speak up, but, the community of businesses and charitable organizations and pubs? I have a friend in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. She goes to a cafe almost every day of the week to work. Yeah. She sets up her laptop and she meets with the colleagues, that have similar interests. And, maybe this is one of the new ways that we should encourage people to get work done. What do you think, Sari?
Absolutely. And, I know so many entrepreneurs who even before this period, they did exactly that. They were home-based, but their genetic programming was needing them to be with other people. We are pack animals still. We have this very strong need to belong and be with other pack members, so to speak. That's why being all alone at home is not good for any of us, even me who loves my own company. But that's exactly, so those people, they started to go to we had meetings, when we had a business meeting, we met up in a coffee place or in a pub or somewhere. So I think when we talk about the different options for working, we are kind of quite wrongly talking about working from home, working in the office, or hybrid. Actually, it needs to be remote working instead of home working.
Right, remote from anywhere.
Exactly, that you can base, and there are great many companies who have that policy already that, you can, I don't care where you work from, as long as you get your work done. And, something what I was thinking about just mentioning earlier, that it's the management style also, how we actually manage people or enable people, that needs to change. Again, going back to my Hewlett-Packard days, the policy was that it was this outcome-oriented management, whereby I give you a task, that's your responsibility, and I expect you to do what you are being asked to do. How you do it, where you do it, it's up to you. So gives that freedom. And then even the location wise, we were able to work from home. I worked from Finland, even if I worked, in the UK. You give that freedom. But of course, you need to make sure that people have the equipment they need and the skills. And
of course.
But yeah, I was just thinking about it. Yes, I mean, for the traffic, for the climate, it's brilliant that we don't need to commute so aggressively anymore, because that wasn't good for anybody. But then, of course, there are other consequences. Other businesses are suffering. But then again, if we take that the remote working can happen anyway, and you start utilizing your locals.
Yeah. I think in the real estate business where I'm involved a bit, I mean, especially in big cities with, now vacant, big buildings, high rises, are there other uses for those buildings? I mean, that's also part of reimagining work life. Can we put homeless people in some of these low-rise buildings and have them actually have, a different kind of a housing situation? So I think the key is to really get creative, and as Greg mentioned earlier, to really think about how you're communicating it, and don't do it one time. Keep communicating, keep figuring out what people need to hear. Greg, did you want to weigh in on one of those points?
Yeah, just what you're all saying really. It's just that you think about if someone had been able to predict, that we would have, that we're still not going back to any kind of normality, and that we'd have this period of time, you might be able to say, okay, people working remotely would need the right equipment, that we'd need the right support and the communication. But there are so many emergent phenomena that come from it just happening, like the idea of going into pubs and working. You wouldn't necessarily think that's something that's going to come from this. So it's being able to be responsive to it as well. It's not saying let's plan for the situation now and then we've got a load of things in place. It's being responsive. Again, which just seems really, relevant to this. It's the sort of the thing we're talking about with the listening. So this stuff is changing, and actually people are behaving in ways that we never even imagined would happen in this thing.
That's right.
And then also now we're also in this completely unprecedented time of sort of returning to work, but that's not meaning what we sort of necessarily think it means, i.e. some kind of phased return to work where the event eventually we'll be back at something that we recognize.
Yeah.
It isn't that. It's a new thing is emerging, and
right.
We don't know.
Well, I have written about the fact that I'm opposed to this idea of when are we going to get back to a new normal, and I'm always saying, well, I'm not so sure I like the old normal. So I think it is, as all of us I think agree about, rebuilding trust. I do a question storming session about how can we rebuild trust in a broken world, and we did these through the year 2020 when there were divisive politics, there was, income inequality, social and racial injustice. In the United States, we had a very challenging president as our leader. I mean, it was a broken world from so many perspectives. And then, of course, the pandemic and the climate crisis. I mean, it was like converging on all of us. So rebuilding trust as we move into what I hope is not a new normal, but a new environment, where we're more creative, more communicative. I think, trust, can we trust government? Can we trust institutions? Can we trust politicians? Can we trust technology? Can we trust animals and nature? Can we trust each other? So I think there's lots of questions. Julie's aware of this question storming idea. You don't stop with one question. You keep asking so that you sort of get to the heart of a problem. And I feel like your collective advice in this call is really valuable. People may be inspired by some of what you all are recommending. Do you have any other ideas about reimagined workspaces, things that, as you said, Greg, some of it's unintended consequences? Any other ideas about what we, the four of us, might recommend to people as they're contemplating decisions about going back to work? Anything comes to mind, something we should try that we haven't? Julie, and then Greg.
What I haven't really noticed being involved in charities is that obviously the children's charity that I'm involved in, we are nearly £200,000 down because we were very events based, and so we couldn't have any events, and so even though trying to do them virtually, it didn't work. Another charity that I'm chair of, Cheltenham Open Door, is a homeless charity, and people gave in their droves to that charity. And what I have noticed is that people do think about other people much more. People have had time to think about other people, especially in this country. We did this whole plaque for carers. And if you lived in a small road, you didn't know any of the people in your road. But as soon as you came out on a Thursday night and started clapping with them, you got chatting to them. You found out who lived on their own. People were taken in turns to check on them. And I think it's been really good for us to be more caring and think about other people. And I hope that that will continue, because I go out and do public speaking about the power of giving, and giving to other people or thinking about other people or small acts of kindness or volunteering is so good for our mental health. Most people leave it until they're retired, but those that do volunteer in their retirement live longer, have more of a purpose in their life. And I really hope that through the pandemic, people, not just people that are retired, but other people have thought about others, will continue to do so, not only for homeless charities. I felt like saying it sometimes, you know, homeless just aren't at Christmas, they're homeless all year round, but it's at Christmas that you get most of the donations. We have really, that is a good plus that has come out of this. People have thought about other people, and I really hope that that continues. And I urge anyone, even if it's an hour that you could give to a local charity, or train to be on the end of a phone for the Samaritans or something like that, just to give in some way would be my point, really.
Yeah, no, I think that's very powerful. And it's funny, I remember, I think it happened in Italy where I am, and it happened in France, and it happened in the UK, where, and in the US as well, I suppose, they went out at a certain hour of the day and applauded the healthcare workers. And it really did. I know in my neighborhood, we were sort of all in houses, but wanting to get out of our houses, around 6 p.m., we just get out and start talking to neighbors. And I think it's so easy to be isolated and not do that.
We would just work, because all we thought about was work and what was coming next. And I think this has given us a time of reflection to think about other people, really.
Yeah. Sorry, what do you think?
Absolutely. I remember seeing this very interesting change very soon after the pandemic really started and the lockdowns. And I saw the change in LinkedIn even. The way how people started to communicate. Suddenly there were human beings writing about kind of human being or human experiences. And of course, when people had more spare capacity, so to speak, in their minds and more time, because they didn't have to commute so much anymore. And this whole situation shook us up so badly that people kind of, they had more time to stop and actually think about being alive. What is it? What is happening in their lives? They started to suddenly see that they have children. They were able to spend time with children, and the desperate need from other people in their lives, their families or friends, suddenly came to their consciousness. And it was this. I think I always believe that everything happens for a reason somehow in this world, in this universe, and we needed this kind of wake up call, so that people actually stopped and realized that this rat race kind of stopped altogether, and they got to whole new kind of spectacles through which they started to see their own lives. And if we again think about the basic human needs, meaning and purpose is the absolutely vital for all of us, that we have a reason to wake up in the morning, or we have a reason to actually go to work. If we talk about work, how do we get meaning and purpose in our lives? There are basically three main ways. One is that we are needed. We feel people need us, and that's what Julie, you were saying, that give, help somebody else. That creates that meaning and purpose in your life. Or then it's learning and stretching yourself. Or then it's believing in something bigger than yourself, or being part of a movement, for example. But this has really given so much more meaning and purpose to people's lives, that they have time to live now, and they can really help other people. And one thing about the communication, what I thought, another kind of advice to whoever is watching this, it's being said that we need to hear when it comes to new information, we need to hear it about 7 to 10 times before it really kind of, we really internalize it. And that's what it's when it's communication. You as a communicator might feel like you are like a broken record, but you need to keep repeating and repeating and repeating. Mm-hmm. And again, through different channels and different ways, because we all learn differently. And I thought that's worth mentioning. And you know, the concept of a workplace or the office, it is changing. And instead of office being that work factory where you, Sandra, you mentioned that, you know, it's just row after row after row. We are like chicken, you know, in those boxes. A good colleague of mine, or actually business partner, Rob Day, who runs amazing interior design company, they redesign office spaces. They are saying that the whole concept of office is changing, and office is now more of a place of a collaboration.
Yes.
It's enabling people to come together, not to work and be like chicken, but actually be those, he calls them free range people. So they are, you know, it's a place where people come that's to right. enjoy each other's company. So again, I think that's a brilliant change if we get to that.
Better than chickens. Well, it's interesting. I worked for Bloomberg for a while, and he had completely open office spaces. So you could basically not have any doors or windows. There were a few conference rooms, but basically we were all out in the open. And it really engendered conversations, not just in a break room or a water cooler, but, you know, just around an office space. And I think some companies now are saying, you know, let's have a smaller office space, and you can come to it. You can coordinate when you come and when you don't come. And we don't need, you know, rows and rows of people working at computers. We can maybe figure out some other creative ways to have people engaged. Drake, you have some comments on that or other ideas?
Yeah, well, just kind of going on from what Sari was saying, you know, taking that example of saying, how do people use offices and how is that different? Again, yeah. It's obviously one of these emergent phenomena. We're talking about something that changes, that we don't necessarily know how it's going to be changing. But one of the things we are in a position to do now, thinking about, you know, technologically, is just find out, as in just through, we can just measure these things, you know. I mean, you can't do everything, measure everything, but, you know, we're in a position where, you know, people are all digitally connected in this kind of, you know, certainly in sort of more, you know, desk-based work. And, you know, we can ask them things, we can measure that, we can look at, you know, you can think these, what are the longer term goals that we want to have, and what are some of the metrics that will let us see how that's going. So people are using the office differently, but we don't just say like, well, isn't that interesting? You know, we think, well,
right.
How are people using the office differently? What is the thing that they're using it for now? Is it actually becoming a space of collaboration, or is it becoming a place that people go to just sort of break up how they've been working, being at home all the time? Or is it a place where they come because they feel they ought to, and those kinds of things? I mean, you know, to an extent, we can actually find those things out. And so, you know, I would certainly encourage people to just measure and look at that data, and then be able to sort of, you know, not just sort of quantitative data, but also ask people things and hear from them. And
yeah, well, to continue, as you suggested earlier, to listen to them, to ask questions, to be curious about, you know, new ways of approaching something. I think it's often, I think business leaders sort of get in ruts and, you know, expect things to be done in a certain way. We've all talked about how productivity can actually increase given, you know, if employees have options to work from remotely or to work in an office. And it used to be that people were fearful that they couldn't measure the productivity. They couldn't measure, you know,
yeah, people have been more productive. I mean, you know, I'm sure there are conflicting studies and that sort of thing, but I've read a lot about people, this remote time. I mean, as you said, employers are very fearful, and it's actually people have been more productive in their flexible environment without the commutes, those sorts of things. And that obviously doesn't apply to everyone, and there are many exceptions that you'd have to look into.
Right.
But just the fact that that is something that people have found out to be true is just, that's really something that's fascinating.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I have one final question for each of you, and then we'll sort of wrap this up. And I'll take a stab at it at the end, but you know, as a business owner, if you were to give one piece of advice to a set of employees, whether they're the ones that work with you or, you know, on a project near you or something, or it could be a client or a customer, if you had one piece of advice about reimagining this work life, in addition to the workspace. What's the thing that, you know, and Julie, especially for you, you know, thinking about younger people, I mean, what advice, what guidance should we be giving people about how they approach, you know, a reimagined workspace? Who wants to go first?
Well, my first thing that comes, I'll just jump in. The first thing that comes to mind, thinking, you know, a lot about, been interested hearing what Sari's been saying about, you know, people's needs. And I guess that's something which, in terms of companies being what those are, and obviously.
Okay, we lost you for a second, so say that again.
Yes, just thinking about how Sari's been talking about the needs, people's needs, and kind of how that's relevant, and obviously the fact that the sort of the emerging well-being at work sector indicates that that is something that people are talking about more. But I suppose it's kind of not something that people are necessarily used to doing when they're thinking about their role at work. It's what are my own needs. So you know, there's ones that were mentioned, this sort of feeling safe, feeling in control of your environment, and feeling respected. You know, those you know, those are things we want, and what can be done to make sure that those happen. So I guess that's the sort of question that I would.
Yeah, well, and it's centered around, as you mentioned, the Sari's ideas about what needs have to be met in order for people to have their head around the world.
And those always, like, you know, I spend so much time looking into companies that have done, you know, implemented effective well-being stuff and spent money on it, and it always wins. There's not sometimes we spent all this money and had this great thing and people had a really nice time at work, but then somehow it went wrong, or you know, we ended up losing loads of money. It wins, you know, culturally, it wins for people's well-being, it wins economically, ultimately, for the company. Like, it's all, so yeah, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, great. I'll come to work for you, Greg. Sari, how about you? What's the piece of advice you'd give to either your employees or employees that you know are considering changing their work life?
Thank you, Craig, for picking up this human needs thing, because this, when somebody gets this concept into their minds, it is an absolute light bulb moment, because it is everything we need to look at. From that comes your diversity, from that comes your well-being, from that comes your people management and leadership. Everything comes from that fundamental, that we need to get our human needs met. And the reason why I got out of that depression was that I understood my human needs, and I understood that I need to get them met in balance. And I made changes, small changes to my life. And I haven't been depressed since, because I know what I need in my life and in my work all the time as a human being. And I think if I could ask people to contact me, or I'm using for my business one tool which is just absolutely amazing. It's called We Thrive. And you can take basically a personal assessment there, or you can run it for your whole company and contact me, because I'm a kind of authorized partner there. We can set up a cool test for you. But that's a tool, for example, where an individual can check out how are they getting their human needs met in the work. And the organization can do the same, whatever tools you use. And there is also a little questionnaire in the Institute, Human Givens Institute's website. So there are these tools which help you to just start understanding how are you getting your human needs met. And the We Thrive tool also tells you that what can you do about it. So it gives you suggestions. But the main thing is that if you start looking at your life through those lenses of those needs, however your situation changes, your life changes, you adjust your life accordingly, and you generally can reach this state where you are well, and your resilience goes up, because you have the things that you need to keep you going in your life. And that's a lot. It's like a holding place, like a foundation for you. So I think anybody interested in that, if you go to a Human Givens website, which is, I think it's www.hgi.org.uk, and that's the institute where I was trained, and it explains those things. And I think that's a stepping stone, you know, towards the better mental health and well-being and happiness and so on to all of us.
And certainly the foundation for returning to the workforce.
Yeah, and I talk about my own experience. I've seen it and I've done it and I'm still here.
Indeed you are. Julie, some comments about advice you'd give?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there are hundreds of thousands of people that have always worked from home. You know, we've been talking today mainly about people that work in offices or whatever and going back, but actually hundreds of thousands of people, you know, single people that run businesses, they've always worked from home. But what we did do that I think we should continue is when we were locked in completely and people were only allowed to go out once a day, and you saw couples everywhere walking every single day together in the afternoons, you know, and I would urge people to continue to do that, because as soon as they go back to work, everyone goes back to work, forgets the fact that that hour where you might have walked around the block with your partner or whatever, the good that would have come out of that, you were actually giving each other quality time, which probably when you're all working really hard, you don't give your partner quality time. Right. And even now I notice there aren't as many people walking as there were when we were only allowed out once a day. So I would say to people, make sure that you keep that going. And of course, obviously, you know, back to the giving, keep that as well, you know, as you go back to work, whether it's with your work colleagues or whatever, try and do something to bond your team back together that is going to raise money for a charity, or bonding, or join a choir, or do something, you know, like that is going to bring your team back together in a way that's also some good is going to come out of it as well.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think part of that getting outside in Washington, D.C., we did a lot of walking, and, you know, it was in the springtime when the cherry blossoms were blooming there. I mean, there was a real communion with nature and going into parks that we hadn't really investigated or explored earlier. So I think getting outside is really good advice. I have a couple recommendations. One is pay attention to your mental health. I think, you know, certainly my colleagues and friends that are mothers and parents that are, you know, dealing with other health problems. I mean, it's so hard to sort of separate what's important to you and, as you point out, Sari, you know, your basic human needs from wanting to take care of others. And I think all of that, you know, that fits in a picture and a story of our lives. But I feel like there's some people that have just gotten so stressed out that they sort of have forgotten about how important it is to just listen to your own heart, listen to your own ideas. The other final piece of advice that I would give, especially to young women, is to feel free to negotiate. You know, no matter what decisions are made by your employer, and whether you're young or old, or male or female, I think, you know, there's an opportunity to say what you need and to ask for it. And I think sometimes young people especially are reluctant to do that. And I'm saying, go for it. You know, get out there and you know, let people know what you need. Sorry, you had a final comment?
Yeah, you know, just I'm working on the diversity, equity, and inclusion. And of course, you know, those are the things which they are not quite legislated yet, but they are becoming that we have to really comply with people's needs. We have to give them what they need. And I think it's coming, definitely. It's going to the right direction. And ask what you need and you may be given.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Greg, Julie, and Sari. This was a great conversation, and I hope it is deemed helpful by the audience that listens to our recording. I think we're done for the afternoon, and I appreciate all of you being with me, and we'll stay in touch. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Andrea.
Bye.